Hello, Assalamu alaikum and namaste. This is Ashish again presenting you Oxfam podcast series. In this episode, we are going to discuss very interesting concept about decolonization and what does it mean for us? What does it mean in the lens of sovereignty? So to discuss this, we have with our Farah Kabir. Farah Kabir is the country director for ActionAid in Bangladesh for many years. And I thought of having Farah Kabir today because not only she's being in this space of understanding decolonization from the lens of running or leading an international organization which is registered in Bangladesh, but also she has been witnessing this discourse for a long time. So thank you and welcome, Farah, for coming to this particular podcast.
Thank you, Ashish, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be with all of you.
Thank you. So my first, to begin this conversation, what do you think? Because this is a buzzword and we all generally understand this concept, decolonization, and very prima facie it is being originated from this challenging the white supremacy in the development sector. But beyond that, what do you think? What exactly it means to us?
I'm with ActionAid. And ActionAid internationally was one of the forerunners to challenge this whole supremacy of the North. And way back, actually, it goes back to 2000, around 4 or 5. Then the leadership at ActionAid International talked about how we have to move away from the North influence and give South the voice, the participation, the knowledge leadership. So ActionAid internationally moved away, registered in the Netherlands, because ActionAid used to be a UK charity founded in 1973. In fact, the founder of ActionAid is also the founder of Oxfam.
I know.
So interestingly, we have the same genes. And in the process, the idea was also to move our administration, our global secretariat to the south. So South Africa, Johannesburg became the center of the ActionAid Federation secretariat. So I use the word federation. So ActionAid was no longer part of just the UK charity. It became a federal model.
Correct.
So we were all coming to it with the idea that we have equal contributions. Now, one country may have more funds, but UK already had an advantage because it started there and it generated the child sponsorship and fundraising. We were then joined by Italy, by Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, all the northern countries, right? And so they may have been instrumental in increasing the funds. So this is how, in terms of when I came on board ActionAid Bangladesh in 2007, the leadership in ActionAid was trying to look at how in the South we could all start becoming independent and a federated model. So you create a board, a general assembly, and they will be responsible for the strategic direction. They would be responsible for policy ownership and so on. So this concept started to spread across the ActionAid Federation. Today we are 71 countries are members of ActionAid international or globally. But most of the countries we are now becoming internationalized, as we say. And for me, this was a big step in the direction of decolonizing. But for ActionAid Bangladesh, what is more interesting is the journey here started in 83.
Okay.
And there was a cyclone. And, we were very prone to respond to disasters, humanitarian actor. And we had a human rights-based approach. So HRBA was an important part of our evolution. But humanitarian response assistance was at the center. And so the journey to Bangladesh also started with a response in Bhola.
Oh,
And at that time, after the cyclone, we were working with the community, then setting up child sponsorship program and developing it. By 90s, mid 90s, it was decided by ActionAid leadership that we would create a national organization and move away.
okay.
So we didn't want it to be the North or a northern organization. In fact, the concept of localization, decolonization had already started to take root in ActionAid. And there we set up an organization, which everyone knows now. It's called Coast Trust. Yeah. So whatever programs we had, assets we had, funds we had, we transferred it to that local organization. It took some time because, 200 years of colonization has impacted our minds.
Indeed.
And our mindset.
Indeed.
And when Coast was being formed, the transformation, the locals were not very pleased because it kind of gave you a different image when you are a part of an international organization.
Correct.
Right? And when you talk to people, when you introduce yourself and say, I'm working with an international organization. So the mindset had not decolonized, but we were trying to go way ahead of the time. So that's how ActionAid's journey in Bangladesh I can trace back. And by the time I came on board in 2007, I set out to develop the board and General Assembly. And it's a process,
And I had listened to your podcast, and I think the viewers can also go and see your podcast with Riza Bhai on Coast.
Riza was the manager.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of fleshing out in terms of how Coast was formed, and that whole nostalgia also spells out that what was the approach at that point in time. I'm going to come to the mindset a bit later because decolonization of mindset, I think it's still an issue that still exists. But drawing the learning from ActionAid's experience, and perhaps there are quite a bit parallels when it comes to setting up the global headquarters. ActionAid did it in Johannesburg. Oxfam International set it up in Kenya. Even in terms of global leadership, more southern leadership phases we started seeing in both organizations for quite some time. But then the question started coming up, and this is now particularly in the current context when the world itself is going through some sort of change in order. The Europe, the US are having their own problems. There is a political right-wing approach. They are becoming more centric to their own issues. The global aid has an impact over it. And in that particular context, when these dialogues come, then it is being perceived that decolonization is perhaps a wrapper for these initiatives, these organizations, that either you set it up your own, be responsible for your own funding, take the name and legacy. Do you think that was a question with ActionAid at that point in time? Did you feel somewhere that perhaps your UK and European affiliates or federation members are shedding away the responsibilities of fundraising over to you? Did you feel burdened as a leader?
No. I think our journey in ActionAid has been different because part of it was also external factors. If you remember 2008, we were all hit by recession.
Correct.
Yeah. And when I joined ActionAid Bangladesh, we had 70% plus funding coming from sponsorship or restricted income, what is known as so that was basically coming from the northern affiliates, right? And then suddenly the recession and the conversion rate of pound just fell, and by 30% our funding went out. So as a member of ActionAid, it wasn't like the global north had said that, okay, now you go and do it, but we became smart. We realize that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't depend on a particular form of funding. You try to diversify. So it shook us to the bone, that recession, because it impacted on our partnership. We had responsibility to the communities, and you can't suddenly go and tell them, okay, sorry, there's no more money, and we're not, So a lot of learning at that point helped us to move away
and
from.
How did it work with you, the colleagues, the people that were working at that point? Did they feel it's more challenging, intimidating, or they also felt that smartness, that this is the right time for us?
No, I think you hit at the right point, that everyone felt very insecure, and there was suddenly there was a lot of dependency on this one source of funding, right?
Correct.
And then suddenly you're shaken, and then you realize some of us were impacted to the level 30% of our salaries disappeared overnight.
Correct.
Right? And then the funding for partners and so on. So I had to spend a lot of time doing counseling, moral, keeping the motivation going. So as a leader, it depended a lot on motivation.
Indeed.
And in keeping the people inspired, and also our partnership, because ActionAid had moved away from direct interventions to a great extent. It was working through partnership, and local organizations, local smallholder farmers, women organization, youth organization, they were all being impacted by it. So we had to spend time trying to say, and they were like, but you always gave us funds, or we were always going to be given this funding. It's kind of an attitude. So then that shift in the journey, that took a lot in terms of myself and the senior leadership.
When we talked about the people, and you're right, when it comes to people working with us, the motivation and managing those insecurities, talking to them. The other level of insecurities perhaps may come from the local organizations here who have been taking funds through you, because in India also it happened, but India, it was not typical decolonization. There were largely economic compulsions that many organizations became Indian, because Indian fundraising market was quite solid, and they thought they were not being able to part of those opportunities. So that was taken up by the local agencies, because suddenly they had these big competitors with Save the Children and Oxfam and Plan. They registered as Indian agencies and started taking funds from the Indian corporates. So there was insecurity in India from local organizations.
For us, it was slightly different in the sense that now there was a sense that INGOs were competing for funds just as local organizations were competing, and they would not have the same strength, the same, policies and financial governance, and even now they don't have it. There's still a struggle. There's a stress between, there's a lot of conversation about localization, but when you look at UN agencies, you look at development partners, the moment they try to do due diligence and they do an assessment, they go back. Because small organizations have limitations in terms of, especially if you're looking at women-headed organizations and young people's organization. So we haven't completed that journey, that process. But because we were aware and we believed in this philosophy and principle of decolonizing, of localization. So as I say, from mid-90s, we've been trying to do that. And if you go across the country, many of your partners, you will find, were developed by ActionAid because of that nature of our partnership. Because we work on child sponsorship, and the partnership through child sponsorship tended to be 10 years.
Indeed.
And some had second round of it. So we have partnered for 20 years. So these small organizations, it's so beautiful to see that how they've flourished.
Indeed. I'm sure. The second dimension about this conversation is all about the lens of sovereignty. And let me explain a bit. When we are international, we are representing the international humanitarian human rights-based organization. Often while addressing the issues, we don't see the geopolitical compulsions, right? whether it would be a refugee issue, whether it would be issue of, say, climate change. Our narratives, our positions are generally universal in nature. But when you apply a lens of sovereignty, when I see it, say, for example, climate issue from Bangladeshi lens, then obviously I see that I, as a Bangladeshi, suffering from climate change, not because of my own deeds, right?
True.
It's because of what has happened over a period of time, like maybe the whole period of 100 years of industrialization and so on in the north. And I'm suffering because of that. So naturally, this whole damage and loss narrative becomes more dominant for me. But that is not taking the kind of strength or the kind of collective positioning on this by the organization. Even in COP28, we found that damage and loss narrative is still not at the forefront of the whole thing. It is still a discourse among the organized agencies or countries affected by this. How do you see these issues now? Because you are in a very unique position. You are one level, your name, your brand is international, but you are registered in Bangladesh. So how do you see these issues, and do you get that liberty to see them, with that autonomy to see them independently as Bangladesh organization?
I think to answer your question, it's important to understand that ActionAid is a federal model. So it's not like the secretariat or there's one entity that controls us.
Okay.
So we are a federated model, and you have to go through the process and become an affiliate. So I had to create the National Board and General Assembly. So first there was an advisory board, then we registered under the Joint Stock Company. We have now got a National Board and National General Assembly.
Correct.
But the reason for doing that was to have the two votes in the ActionAid International General Assembly and Board.
Okay.
A voice, you have a voice and participation there as well. So it is not like our National Board and Assembly are confined to working within just in Bangladesh. We also have a linkage, and we also have a vote in the global affairs. So when the global strategy was developed, we played a very strong role in that. Now, in terms of you're asking whether we have the autonomy now, and you chose an interesting example, that is of climate change. It's ActionAid Bangladesh that led the climate change discourse in ActionAid.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were the forerunners, because I started working here in 2007, and the repeated disasters and the impact that was happening for the community, because our whole agenda was entitlement, people's rights, people graduating out of poverty, women's empowerment. All this was being infected by climate change. So we took it to the ActionAid Federation, and we had to do a lot of internal advocacy and lobbying.
Indeed.
And then it got adopted at the ActionAid Federation level. And we are still recognized as the forerunners in terms of a lot of the countries came way later.
Okay.
They played around. It's environmental, it's ecology, it's but we said that it is all of that, but it's about climate justice.
Indeed.
And when you said that as a Bangladeshi, what is my sentiment? Definitely, we're a delta, we're a lower riparian. Whatever is happening globally is impacting us. The glaciers melting, the Himalayas melting, all this comes here. The extreme weather. Now look at how we suffered from heat in 2023. And the people here are suffering because of lack of water, lack of rain, and so on. So for us, we led the issue of climate justice within the ActionAid Federation. And it is very interesting to see the ActionAid leadership has picked it up. And it's now doing so many more campaigns. It's dedicated resources there, and ActionAid Global Secretariat has people. Our Secretary General is very much into it, and what we have looked at it very much from the rights perspective. There is a programmatic side, definitely. We have a history of adaptation programs, mitigation to a little bit, but because I'm in Bangladesh, so mitigation is now, but a lot of policy reform. And we work very closely with our policymakers, with the government, with the parliamentarians, and we've been working at the national level and at COP.
Okay.
So since 2007, I've been attending COP, and on many occasions, at the request of government representatives, I have represented Bangladesh in whether it's on gender and climate justice, whether it's on adaptation. So we had that advantage, and then we came back from Paris and from Sendai and did unpacking, demystifying. So they understood that we had that ability and role and dedicated people to work. Like we had Professor Salimul Haq also working together. And so both Salim and I, we worked together hand in hand and taking these issues when it came to influencing our government. And we managed to mobilize communities, help them to understand this climate issue so that it was not something just understood by the researchers and the scientists or us development practitioners, but taking it down to that level. And we worked with the women so that they could talk about, because they all understand. It's just putting the words or framing it in the way we understand. It was our lacking to be able to understand what was happening on the ground and also connecting them with the policymakers. So,
So it looks like, that means, these are the
so if I may just summarize. So in response to your question, it was a long answer. We all have the opportunity in ActionAid to prioritize what is impacting the country where we are. Where we are. So we have the global strategy, a 10-year strategy. We have to align with the values.
Yes.
The most important thing is in ActionAid is that you have to align with the values. You have to align with the principles. And then what you prioritize within that is relevant to where you are. It has to be contextualized.
Absolutely. No, there is no debate that the values can be universal. They are universal. But then how are they being manifested and how they correspond to different issues in different countries? That could be pretty different than others, In some countries, your narrative on climate must be completely focused on reducing carbon footprint. But or maybe even consumption, like in Europe and, these days they are
fossil fuel
consumption.
Yeah.
But in the country like Bangladesh, it should be on damage and loss and,
loss and damage. Yeah.
So that's very interesting and quite a lot of learning, I guess, there even for Oxfam, because we are somewhere in the middle. When we were talking about this, we have all space in terms of taking the discourse forward within the organizations. But I think we still have to perhaps go a bit mile away in terms of like having this liberty and autonomy, within the kind of model that we have so far. And I guess affiliates may have something like those who are independently registered and all that. But we are in Bangladesh not independently registered. We are still working as Oxfam GB's, extension head here. This dimension is all about the whole psychological decolonization. What kind of, because many times when I come across this, even when we talk about localization and, local organizations and identifying local issues, local, solutions and all of that, a lot of focus is given on the that international tag. Many times people say that, even if it's not Oxfam, name is important for us. And I said, why? Because, this is international name. It comes with some aura or something like that. Even in our people, how do you think? Because it's still there, very much there.
If you remember when we started talking, I told you about the mindset of the people. So when we tried to localize, nationalize, and create cause, there was protest. In fact, there was a lot of discontent, dissatisfaction, because they felt that so that's the colonial mind. When I started talking about forming the National Assembly and the board, our colleagues were saying, why should we be, it gives me greater access. So the leadership has to build the narrative and also support the staff to transit. Because, as I said, 200 years of colonial mind, why is it important to have that international tag? What does it bring? So then it doesn't stop with us. You have to go out and reach the bureaucracy. You have to reach the policymakers. You have to reach the media and explain that we're just equally, if not more capable and competent, particularly when it comes to any issue that is national. And then you have to demonstrate to the leadership. You have to demonstrate through your programs and build that. But still, local organizations, smaller organizations have not been able to transit out. So it's our responsibility to help them. And now, people talk about Action Aid Bangladesh, and they don't, I think at the back of the mind, they still think that Action Aid is the global, But after a good number of years that I've been leading on this organization, we have a senior management working on it. I think that shift is in the making. And then we have our board, General Assembly. Now, all non-profit organizations have board.
Correct.
But there's a big but, because if the board comprises of family members, or if it is made up of your relatives, then that's a different board than what we have when we make a conscious construction of a board, because they come on the basis of their competencies, their own contributions in terms of knowledge leadership, innovation. Then that is decolonizing. Because you may have a board, you may register, and you have an assembly, but you have to look at it, how effective it is. And the tradition in Bangladesh is that many of the big non-profits have boards, but it was still one-person leadership. And I think that needs to be a discussion for another day, that internally, within our own country, our practices, we haven't decolonized.
Indeed.
We have, because our political history is about dynastic politics.
Correct.
And so our non-profit organization is also about dynastic leadership.
Correct.
It's the same. It's a reflection in the political arena. Absolutely. It's the same reflection in the non-profit organization. And you will find that Action Aid and maybe Oxfam and other, we are creating professional boards, and we're creating General Assembly. Our board has membership, 10% membership from the community.
Correct.
A lot of people say, well, the community doesn't understand board and governance. Wrong. We have 10% membership from our partnerships. They are also in the assembly. But because they're partners, they're not on the board, because there's a conflict of interest, right? And then the board is made up of extremely competent individuals from Bangladesh. So they guide the management.
Indeed. So, but this conversation is really very interesting, and I would like to take the second part of it. Why I need the second part is because the entire aspect of decolonization, as you have explained, it is fit with this whole lens of sovereignty and nationalism, which is these days are again the buzzwords, not within the sector, but if you see this whole geopolitical right-wing flourishing. I think we need to understand it in that context as well. So going back to the viewers, I think this is a very interesting conversations going on. This is part one. We'll get into the second part and we'll discuss more on the whole aspect about sovereignty and nationalism, and in that particular context, how decolonization fits for us. So stay tuned with us and let's get into the second part very soon.